for tuning in. If you're new, I'm Lauren and it's a pleasure to have you. Thank you. Alright, we're going to check out a video, and this one is one of the pressing situation that Ukraine has found herself in. The United States President authorized Ukraine to use the U.S. long-range weapon against the Russian soil. So the question is it going to change any game, or is it going to escalate the war? Let's find out.
Joe Biden has just given Ukraine the green light to cross a Russian red line. Authorization to fire US-made long-range missiles directly at Russian targets on Russian soil.
The Kremlin is now accusing U.S. President Joe Biden of adding, quote, oil to the fire.
This is precisely what the U.S. didn't want to do and has held off doing since nearly the start of the war in 2022.
We won't be sending long-range rockets for use beyond the battlefield in Ukraine.
But things are different now. Over the weekend, Russia...
Truly, this is more like adding a cold oil to the war, and then at the same time, Ukraine has been held back for so long, and yet it didn't change the fact that Russia was still evading, and they kept on pressing so hard. And I guess this is done based on their attack on Ukraine a couple of days ago, and maybe that may have escalated the issue.
Over the weekend, Russia launched the single deadliest attack on Ukrainian territory in months.
Russian attacks have killed at least 21 people in 2 regions.
Targeted with 120 missiles and 90 drones overnight.
North Korea has also entered the war. Donald Trump will soon enter the White House. And while Ukraine's president has already threatened with this new long-range capability that an attack on Russian soil will come without warning,
the Kremlin says Ukraine has fired US-supplied long-range missiles at a military facility inside Russia in what would be the first attack since Washington authorized the use of its weapons on Russian territory.
The Kremlin's defense ministry says 6 long-range US ATACMS missiles were fired by Ukraine at the Bryansk region.
Nobody appears to be wasting any time in getting this permission from the Biden administration into the battlefield.
Russian lawmakers have responded, this risks starting World War III. So how was this decision made to allow US weapons to be launched into Russian territory, and how does this change the war? Ukraine has desperately argued to use this American-made long-range missile system known as ATACMS. That's an acronym for Army Tactical Missile System. It's manufactured by Lockheed Martin, a series of supersonic ballistic missiles that can fly up to 300 kilometers. That's farther than any Ukrainian missile is capable of. Now, you may or may not know, the US government actually already gave this missile system to Ukraine last year, and it's already used it.
Ukraine's military has shared video they say shows their first use of US long-range missiles against Russian forces.
But these attacks were against Russian targets inside Ukraine because the US wouldn't allow them to fire their rockets into Russian territory. The balancing act for the US since the start has been, how much can we help Ukraine without effectively declaring war on Russia ourselves?
These systems have to use American guidance information. So basically, the Americans are doing co-firing. And the Russians have always said that by so doing, it's the Americans are becoming directly involved in the war, not indirectly, by simply handing off, let's say, like a tank.
In a certain sense, it moves closer towards the US being engaged in a war against Russia rather than supporting a third country in which Russia is in dispute, in conflict, in war with.
The US government did eventually loosen its position back in May, allowing Ukraine to fire ATACMS missiles at Russian targets in Russia that were actively attacking or preparing to attack. So if they were, for example, firing from their side of the border, Ukraine was now allowed to fire back. But today, this wider authorization opens up a brand new array of possibilities. So take a look at this map here of Ukraine. According to the Institute for the Study of War, that's a Washington-based think tank. So the blue right here is Ukrainian territory that Ukraine controls. The red, down in the south and the east, that's Russian-occupied Ukrainian territory. The yellow is how far into Russia Ukraine was able to strike with its existing missile systems. That's about 77 kilometers deep. But inside this dotted line are 245 additional military targets that are within a 300-kilometer range. So these are airfields, they are unit bases, they're anti-air batteries, battalion positions. Now, this map was drafted this past summer, so things have changed, but it gives you a broad sense of what unleashing ATACMS missiles allows Ukraine to hit where it had no reach before.
Russian command is going to anticipate that Ukraine will fire these missiles. That means they will begin to be more careful on how they concentrate forces for an attack.
Ukraine's position is that it's been fighting with one arm tied behind its back, that self-defense doesn't just mean waiting for the enemy to come, but rather striking first to prevent incoming attacks. But there's good reason to question just how impactful this new capability will be.
It'll be significant, but not decisive.
Early indications from U.S. officials tell us that this new long-range capability is intended to be used primarily in one region, one part of Russia, that might also explain a lot about why the U.S. has suddenly changed its mind on all of this.
Russia is massing 50,000 troops. That includes North Korean soldiers for what looks to be a new offensive in Kursk.
Let me explain. You may recall a few months ago, Ukraine pulled off a daring ground assault, pushing several hundred square kilometers into Russian territory. Hundreds of troops, dozens of tanks, and armored vehicles. Well, it may surprise you to learn Ukrainian forces are still there, reinforced, fanned out, and the Russians have been bombarding those positions. But very recent reports suggest they're now preparing for a major ground assault. 50,000 troops, both Russian and North Korean, to take back their territory. And U.S. officials have said North Korea's involvement has very much changed the equation.
The addition of North Korean troops to buttress and support Russia makes it that much more difficult for Ukraine. So to try to kind of lessen that or mitigate that worsening situation, Biden has elected to send the capability to Ukraine.
So part of the stated goal here is to level the playing field. North Korea has already sent about 10,000 troops to Russia's aid, and there are reports it could send as many as 100,000, depending on how long the war goes. But the other thing to keep in mind, and this is what some experts we spoke to think may actually be the bigger thing, is that Ukraine is very much on the clock, because in 2 months' time, Donald Trump takes office.
Will he go for the threatened extreme policy of essentially conceding to Russia? That is one line of avenue. The other one is more that he will essentially insist that Ukraine seek a peace deal on the current terms with conceding sovereignty over the area Russia already has.
If Donald Trump attempts to end the war, as many experts have suggested, by conceding Ukrainian territory to Russia, Kursk suddenly becomes very important, because to date, it may very well be the only bargaining chip Ukraine has to win back its own territory in some kind of trade. So the goal, according to U.S. officials, help Ukraine hold on in this Kursk region for as long as possible.
These systems will disrupt Russia's attempts to concentrate its forces as they attack Ukrainian positions in Kursk. Same with the logistics hubs.
Now, there are some important limitations where we don't really know how big of a deal they'll be. For starters, how many ATACMS missiles does Ukraine actually have?
It's insufficient numbers to significantly change the outcome of the battlefield. The Ukrainians will be able to complicate the planning and execution for the Russians. It will not be able to stop them.
Another thing we don't know, is this just one last big move by the Biden administration to turn the tide before leaving office? Or will this encourage other major contributors to Ukraine's defense, like the UK or France, to loosen long-range restrictions as well? They too will have to weigh the risks of inaction versus action, emboldening Russia by limiting help to Ukraine, or angering Russia by becoming more involved.
I think everybody realizes that there is no strategic victory for Ukraine at the end of this. So it's how much do you want to escalate against Russia? The Russians have said they will counter-escalate. So by saying yes to these missiles, there's a calculus that the Russians will hit back somehow.
Either way, the war has now escalated to a new level. Russia has already insisted this crosses a red line. This amounts to NATO being directly at war with Russia. And Ukraine has already made one thing very clear.
Але удари завдають не слова.
When it comes to the timing of any potential long-range strike, Volodymyr Zelensky says, such things are not announced. The missiles will speak for themselves.
Well, guys, that was quite enlightening, getting to find out, will the new incoming president, go ahead with this plan, or is he going to abolish it? Well, do let me know what you think about this video right down in the comment section, and also don't hesitate to give it a thumbs up, share, and subscribe for more, and I'll see you again in the next one. I remain your girl, Lauren.